Hi all, my name is Lee and welcome back to the channel. So in the first part of building my high-end guitar bridge, we finished the saddles and I'm really happy with how those brass saddles have turned out. For this part, I'm going to do the most critical piece, which is the base. This needs to be really accurate with the positioning of the features on there. Now I'm going to make the base out of this piece of steel. So let's take a closer look. So I've drawn up some measurements of what I want it to look like. I won't go through all the measurements, but the way I'm going to do it, as you can see, I'm counting up this way. I'm actually going to start from this edge and work this way on the bridge, because this edge is the most critical in my mind and I want to get that correct. And if any mistakes happen, it will be easier if they happen down this end. I can easily correct them. So that's what I'm doing. As you can see, the main critical parts will be the position of this pivot point, and then in relation to where the block and the holes are for the block underneath the bridge. So as long as I can get these critical positions correctly, it means when I put the bridge together, it should still fit into a standard Fender slot and work correctly and still be tunable correctly with the intonation. So that's what it's going to look like. Let's set this piece of steel up on the mill and then we'll start cutting. So I'm going to rough out this with the 12mm end mill, but I'm going to finish it with a 6mm primarily to get the smaller radius in the corners when I mill this out. So I've also written down the measurements I should use, taking into account of the different radius, so I can look at the draw and try and not make any mistakes. So all that's next to do is let's rough out this slot where the saddles will go. Okay, so that first end mill is just too blunt now, so I'm going to try a new one to see if it cuts this a little easier. So looking at the corner radius, I think that's absolutely fine. So I'm not going to bother using the smaller end mill. I'm going to take a finishing pass with the 12mm instead. And I think that should work fine. If I find it doesn't and the saddles can't move back enough on the tuning, then I can always re-mill it with a smaller end mill. So let's just do a finishing pass on this to get it done. So before I put the pivot holes in, the next thing to do is just take 4mm off these two raised edges. So I've put a 3mm drill in there now. This is the other critical part, is the position of the strings in relation to the two pivot points. So I've lined this up. I need to put the 6 holes in. That will eventually allow the strings to come through the block and into the bridge. So the final 3 holes with a part in this orientation are the ones to screw the bridge to the block underneath. So I need to put 3 of those in. Let's do that. Okay, so I've come across my first tooling problem. I wanted to put a recess for the screw head into these 3 holes, but the issue is my tool actually catches the back of the bridge, so I can't use this. But luckily I've looked around to see what I can use instead, and I actually have an 8mm standard drill that I can use instead. So hopefully that should put the recess in instead of using this tool for it. So this is it so far. It's actually quite a complicated little piece. Well, at least for me, because I'm still learning a lot of this. But I've managed to get it all done. Everything seems to be correct. Off camera, I did actually take these edges down, but I'll probably chamfer all of the edges at some point when I finish this off. There's still some deburring to do, things like that. But I'm really happy with this first pass on the mill. The next thing I need to do is these small holes that the strings come through, I need to now replicate those on the back. So I need to put it back in the mill, but this way round, and then put those holes in so they directly match. These just need to be 3mm holes. So the next operation I need to do is I need to put a bevel on this back edge where the pivot points are, so the bridge can move correctly. And I'm just trying to decide what angle I should put this in at. So I've got my angle blocks out. I think I'm probably going to go for a 5-degree angle. I think that should be enough, just across the pivot points, just so this bridge can pivot properly when I've put it all together. What I think I might do is I like my bridges to be relatively flat. So on a Fender bridge, quite often you can have them raised slightly, but I don't like that. I like to have mine hard, tight to the body of the guitar. So to be able to go the opposite way, to lift the strings, I'm going to also put a small bevel at the very back of the bridge as well, probably of the same degrees, and that way I can tilt the bridge both ways. So that's what I think I'm going to do. So I just need to decide what angle to put this in at, and then we'll make those cuts. Okay, so this one's quite a weird setup. I couldn't work out how to do this. Now I've got a couple of options, obviously using one of the angle blocks, but the other option is to actually tilt the head of my mill. But I don't want to tilt the mill because it's set up so perfectly. I don't want to accidentally ruin it. So I want to leave the mill as it is. So what I've done instead is I've put the 2 normal parallels in each side to rest the back of the bridge on, and then I tapped in the angle to slightly tilt the workpiece. So now the angle block's in nice and tightly, and it's still touching the back of the parallel, so this should be at the correct angle. I've used a 5-degree angle, and it should be completely level. If there's a better way to do this, let me know, but this seems to work. I'm pretty happy with this, so let's make the cut. So as it turns out, 5 degrees isn't quite enough, so I've re-angled it to 10 degrees using the same process. So this one doesn't need to be anywhere near as elaborate on the setup. I don't need to be exact on an angle with this. So I'm just going to use the chamfer tool to take the edge off. And while the chamfer tool's in there, I might as well clean up all of the edges while I'm here. So I'm really pleased with how this is looking so far. Everything lines up nicely. I've put one of the saddles in just to test and it works perfectly. So the next thing I need to do is actually put a hole in here with a nylon insert to put the tremolo bar in. So that needs to fit in there as well. But what I also need is I want a stopper on the back of that. So I need to put a piece of brass in as well. But I want to leave a piece of the brass showing at the top just for the look, because I think it will look quite nice with the brass saddles and just a brass surround just in there where the tremolo bar goes into. So I'm just trying to work out how I'm going to do this. What I think I'm going to do is turn this into a thread, drill a hole into it, put a nylon insert into it, and then thread it into there. 8.5mm hole for an M10 thread. So I'm going to take this down to 9.7mm for the M10 thread, but I'm actually going to leave this a little wider at the top as a little cap, just so it looks good when I screw it into the base of the bridge. So here are the pieces so far. We've got the main bridge base. I've put a thread in there to thread this piece of brass in. So I can just put the brass through there. And this acts as a lever for the bar. And it's also a nice brass feature, a coloured feature. Then the small plastic tube will fit inside that brass fitting, and then the bar itself will slide into the plastic tube, and that should give it enough leverage to use this correctly. So that's the idea, but the one last thing I need to do is I need to drill and tap a thread for a grub screw into there. Now the reason I want to do that is I want the grub screw to be able to adjust the tension pressing the plastic against the whammy bar. So set this back up in the mill and put that thread in. So I think this is looking pretty good so far. I think we'll probably bring the video to an end here, because on the next part I'll make the block to fit on the back. I'm making the block just out of a piece of steel. So I'll need to drill the holes into there to put the strings to, and also connect the springs to on the back of the bridge. But for now, I'm really happy how this is looking. But just one last thing, let's put my saddles in there just to see what it's going to look like. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Catch me on the next one where we complete the bridge by building the block to put on the back of it. And then we'll put it all together. And if I've got time, I'll put it on one of my guitars and I'll test it out. So thanks for watching.